Also be careful when people talk about the Hoffman case where they have information but they give you no names or source. This is one of the things that Mark liked to play, and people are willing to go along with it, keep secrets, and we still have it. I can't tell you. I get this all the time from George. I can't tell you. And then I threatened to break his legs, and then he still wouldn't tell me, so anyway. I'm going to turn it now the time over to George so we can hear what he has to say. But before I turn it over to him, I want to make some personal comments about Mr. Throckmorton. And these are nice things, so you don't have to worry, Scott. Back in 1991, I came over from Colorado because my career was going down the tube and my love life wasn't there anymore. And through my good friend Van Hale, I worked in his business for a while. But in 1994, I hired on to work in the crime lab of the Salt Lake City Police Department. Got back into my chosen career. A year later, they changed the supervisory of the crime lab from an officer or sergeant to a civilian, and they brought in George Throckmorton. And the thrill that I have had for the last 10 years of working under his direction, literally sitting at his feet, hearing stories and information about the Hoffman case, has been one that has not only enriched my professional career, but also my advocacy of things Mormon. And he has been kind enough to invite me into his life and his research, and included me on things, even though he sometimes would play games, like with the John D. Lee scroll, but that's another story. I want to tell you how much I have appreciated the opportunity to get to know him as a friend. I care about him dearly. He was a dear friend, and I love him dearly. And I hope that he's here with us a long time, because there is so much to share with us. And I want to close with this, and as George comes up, a question that I have of him, reference to a statement that I read here in Mormon Murders, the greatest book on the case, I'm sure. And this is during the time that George and his associate Bill Flynn were examining the documents down at the church archives. This is what it says: on the day Flynn left for Arizona, Bill Flynn is from Phoenix, Arizona, a church delegation led by Gordon Hinckley visited the conference room. They looked suspiciously at all the equipment while Throckmorton and Flynn explained the process. They asked some questions, but to Flynn's astonishment, never asked the most obvious question of all: are the documents genuine? George, as you come up here, I'd be very interested to hear about this experience. But what's it like to be in the middle of this visit, have the leader of the church, although at the time he was a counselor, but the man leading the church who became the prophet? What was that experience like? Maybe you can share with us. And what do you think why he didn't ask that question when he was there, you were there in his presence?
If I can respond to Mr. Mayfield's question. As I advance in age, I have a tendency not to remember certain things and to remember other things even more than they actually happened, I guess. But as President Hinckley came in to visit us that day, I don't remember it at all because it just never happened. In fact, the closest association, and some of you may have heard this story, I've told it once before, the closest association I ever had with President Hinckley was because of my friends. I've been in law enforcement, as was mentioned, almost 40 years. And my son used to work at the church office building. It was his job to get the cars ready for the general authorities to take to their various assignments. And this is the story that I heard about President Hinckley, which took place several years ago. He likes to hot rod, is that the right expression? And as he came to pick up a new car, they always have a chauffeur to drive around the First Presidency and some of the apostles that can't drive too well. But as he came and saw the new car and his chauffeur was ready for him, he looked at it and he said, "I've always wanted to drive a new car. Is it all right if I drive?" Well, what's the chauffeur going to say? No. But the chauffeur said, well, you know, I've always wanted to sit in the back seat, too. So as they started driving down to Provo, President Hinckley's foot got a little bit heavy. They were going a little too fast. And as he looked in the mirror after hearing kind of an unusual noise, he saw some red and blue lights flashing behind him. And he pulled over to the right, and the highway patrolman come up and looked in the car and went back and got on the air and called his dispatch and says, I need to speak with my supervisor. And the supervisor got on and said, what's wrong? And he says, I just pulled over a very important person. And he said, well, who is it? Is it Mayor Rocky? He says, no, more important than him. He said, well, is it the governor? He said, no, more important than him. Is it the President of the United States? He says, no, more important than him. He said, well, who is it? He says, I really don't know, but President Hinckley is his chauffeur. That's the only story I know of President Hinckley. That's the closest I've ever come to him. But I can say this, my involvement in this case, again, lasted for 16 months. I entered the case about 6 weeks after the bombings took place. I was working for the Attorney General's office at the time as an investigator of white-collar crime with a background in forensic examination of documents. And there's many, many stories, and the one thing I learned relating to what Steve said is that even the investigators have different theories on what happened. There were 11 of us for 16 months, and if you talk to one investigator, he will say one thing. You talk to another one, he will say something else. And the reason being is we did different interviews. We spoke to different people. And about every morning we would meet together as a group and discuss what had happened. And so I heard a lot of stories from the other investigators. And then we would get our assignments, and then we would go out to conduct our investigation. There are a lot of things that I heard and that I experienced firsthand that contradict so many things that are in the book, the various books that's out there. What I've done today, I understand, we've only got 20 minutes left if I understand how much time I have. And there's supposed to be some cards being passed around. Are those questions? Okay. I'm not going to tell you a whole lot about my involvement other than I'm going to answer questions that may be here. And if anybody else has any, raise your hand now and do it, because in about 10 minutes I'll be answering them. Most of you know a lot about this case. And as I've given talks in the past, I talk about the elementary things that have happened. And I'm not going to do that today. I'll be happy to answer any questions. But what I have is a brief overview of many things. I took over 700 slides of different documents. I've never shown them. I never will be able to show them. We spent 3 days once in our professional organization in Palm Springs, California, several years ago to go over them. And I was unable to show them all then. But what I have done is put a montage of slides together, which will give you a brief but more or less a thorough overview of the case itself. And I'm going to need some help up here on how to turn this light off so we can start the others going. And then when we're through, I'll try and answer these questions. This one. This one. Can you see it? It's awful dim.
It'll show up in a minute.
Okay, because it's on now. There we go. You'll just have to read these. I'm not going to say a whole lot.